And hello, everybody, and welcome to Two Guys Talking Sports. I'm Pat McDonald with Radigan Media. He's Tim Burney with the Sports Reports. And joining us tonight is the group sports editor for the Daily Review and Morning Times, Logan Hill. How are we doing, Logan?
Good. How are you guys doing tonight?
Doing really well. Let's start with District 4 and more specifically NTL football. Obviously, want to start with the big one.
Might as well.
Troy, Southern Columbia. I'm not sure. I thought Troy was going to win that game. I don't think anybody was predicting 69-28.
It turned into a track meet really quickly. I was talking to a guy before the game. I was standing by the fence, and he leaned over his score prediction. And I don't like to get in the business of score predictions. I think you can get yourself in some hot water. But I just said, I think this game will end up being like a 24-14. That was just the hunch I had. Last year it was a monsoon, so it was 14-0. But this year it was, I think, 25-0 Troy before Southern finally scored, or Southern Columbia. I've wondered that because like South Williamsport gets away with just South sometimes.
Southern's
good, yeah. Southern works.
But then they finally scored, and then Troy scored again. So I think it was 32-6 at halftime. Southern scored again out of the break to get a little bit closer. I think they got it to 32-20, and then Troy scored 37 straight unanswered. So really just Troy had the kind of night they've had every Friday or Saturday night so far this year, and did it in a big emphatic way.
Yeah, it's funny. We were talking about before we came on here. I wonder, because there is a next year and a year after, if putting 69 points on Southern Columbia is a wise choice.
Yeah, it's one of those, I guess, and it sounds like from talk, I've only been up here for now 2 football seasons, but in talking to some of the players after the game, it sounds like Southern Columbia has been the big bad wolf the last couple of years for them in the post.
20 years. Yeah.
You're exalting some demons, and it feels good to probably do it against a 7-time champion. So I'd imagine that in games that big and games like that, there's a lot of respect, but it's also we're going to line it up and play football.
I was gonna say you can call them Southern Columbia University.
Yeah, SCA Academy, right? Yeah,
whatever you want to call them. But they've been like it's going to be a new state champ for the first time in a long time now. Although they switched classes.
They went from A to double A, and it didn't stop. But
at least District 4 wise, 7 in a row, or at least 9 in a row in the district. They've been to the last 9 state championships.
Like 7 in a row, maybe.
And I think they've won 18 out of the last 20 district titles.
Yeah, they're incredible. I mean, Coach Roth is the best in the business, obviously down there, but Coach Smith is really good too, and he's been waiting for this year, I think, to really to make his mark. And it seems like if you beat Southern Columbia, you got to be the favorite, right? I would think.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. I think this Troy team is better than they were last year. And Southern Columbia last year, they gave Southern Columbia their best game. Granted, it was in a monsoon, like Logan said, but I got to think that Troy's got to be among the favorites to win a state.
They ranked number 1 in the state.
Troy football has been ranked 1 by PA Football News. Maybe it changed this week.
I thought they were. I glanced at it today. I thought they were 2. Maybe they were 1.
Every time I've checked
one, so
PA Football News is the one I typically use to check that against, and they've been 1 for as long as I've looked, which I think is such an interesting thing to me. I mentioned it already, but moved up here, had never heard of Bradford County, never heard of Troy, Towanda, where I live now. And so to have a team that's been on this kind of a run, and one thing that might be interesting, and maybe it's the way the game played out, most of their second halves this year, they were playing a lot of their JV guys or maybe some of their younger guys, but they scored the most points against Southern Columbia. The only team they scored more points again was their opener when they played Sayre this year. So kind of an exclamation point in that playoff game.
And the Mercy Rule Southern, that's pretty good. And like you were saying, last year's team they lost some guys from last year, but then I think Woodward's progression as a quarterback is really just, that's outclasses anything else that they lost, right? So it's having him as a senior and really knowing what he's doing.
Yeah, and just so physical and big, or strong up front, and they just, it's kind of they developed that
best weightlifting program in the league. I think they've always. I mean, 3-4 years ago they lost that big Imp kid going to St. Francis.
2 of them. And there was brothers that were both.
I've heard stories.
And they haven't, but they haven't missed a beat on the line. So you lose
it's a culture. I mean, that's what the word I was searching for. It's a culture over there, and they're in the weight room constantly. And when we had Evan Woodward on, he talked about. I asked him who's the big workout warrior, and he couldn't stop at one. He listed like 8 kids.
Yeah. So I mean, they have just to name a couple of guys, and if you name 15, I'm sure they all contribute. But Avery Sens was a state champion or made the podium in shot put last year. So he's a big, strong guy, came back as a senior. I had the pleasure to be able to attend the old shoe banquet last week, and they talked about their seniors, and Coach Smith talked about a guy like Easton Terraberry, he said is just came to him at one point. I believe he was talking about his sophomore year and said, "Coach, what do I need to do to get on the field?" And just came a practice, a weight room guy that was there every time that there was an event, and just those two guys. And then that's not even shouting out the other senior, Ty Spencer, who has been another guy on the line for them. So you take three seniors that are really able to pull their own wherever they go on whatever field they play on, and add in a bunch of other guys around them. That's the kind of things you see. And then we talked about it right before we press record tonight, but just there's guys that are in that backfield that could be 1,000-yard rushers at other schools, and they're not because they're sharing snaps with other guys.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's kind of like Tioga was the last few years. You could have, how many different kids could be District 4 Player of the Year, or NCL Player of the Year, but because they share touches, that none of them get the acclaim they probably deserve.
Yeah, it could be even Woodward or Gilliland could really make a run at. I think Riley Vanderpool probably might win it just because he has the numbers and he's the best player.
I mean, that gets voted on by coaches and such.
Yeah,
that's where I think it leans. I don't know how you can look at it and not say that. Now he missed the 2 games at the start of the year, so will that get held against him on a whiteboard when they go to sit down?
But his numbers are still probably better than anybody else's, even missing those 2
What
games.
was the crowd like over there? Obviously, they moved it from Alperon to Mansfield University. What was the crowd like over there?
It was a good atmosphere. I was told get there early. Parking is a little tough at Mansfield University. It was actually my first time seeing the football field there. I'd been there for baseball, but they had Troy and Southern Columbia on the big bleachers because across the field is just some small extra stands. So they had some people over there, but there was a couple calls that some Tigers faithful might not have agreed with early on, but of course they didn't, right? That's how it goes in any sport, especially big leverage, high school football games. But it was a good crowd. I think they started to probably filter out as the nail kind of started to get hit into the wood a little bit there down the stretch. But good environment, and the game lived up, at least for Troy's sake, to kind of what the billing had been.
You mentioned the old shoe banquet. I've been to it a bunch of times. It's one of my favorite things I cover because that relationship between Jimmy Smith and Tyler Sechrist is really funny because they're really good friends. The only week they don't talk is their week, kind of. But then I remember when Canton was going on their run, Jimmy Smith at that banquet would talk about, hey, we might be out of it by next week, but we're going to root for Canton the whole way. And I know it's vice versa this year.
I think it was the Daily Review Morning Times. We tape a podcast every week. And I think I was talking with Kirk Lovison, who we have hosted with us. And he was like, oh, Canton's like, oh, maybe cheering for Southern Columbia a little bit. I was like, I don't think so. Because Canton echoed those same kind of sentiments that night. And it's just, go represent District 4, go represent the
They're all friends. I mean, it's kind of like athletes there nowadays.
They play summer league baseball and basketball together, and
Yeah, let's. So now Troy gets a team that just beat Towanda. Towanda had a historic year for them, first home playoff game in 12, 13 years.
It's 2014, I believe.
Was that it was? Okay.
Playoff game.
And but Riley Vanderpool, speaking of Riley, 6 touchdowns in that first game to get him into the district semis. Unfortunately, Warrior Run gets the 43-20 win. Last week, I was up in the booth at Waverly last week, and we had 2 phones going. Jordan Shaw had the Troy game or the Towanda game on his. I had the Troy game on mine. So we were keeping tabs on that one, and Warrior Run seemed to kind of run away early.
It just looks like they jumped in front, and Towanda was left to play catch up. And I think 2014 was the last win, home or away. I think 2011 might have been the last home playoff win. So either way, it was history, a decade plus you're looking at, but it just seemed like they needed an answer down the stretch, and Warrior Run was looking to go to its first ever district final as well. So we get down to these games, and it's a couple moments maybe go your way, and you could have control of it. So I wasn't there personally. I was over at Mansfield, but just a great season for Towanda from start to finish, really.
I think Warrior Run Towanda was a little bit of a victim of the NTL. Warrior Run played a tougher schedule. Towanda had a great year, but they didn't see the same competition, and I think they ran into a Warrior Run team that was in the same boat. Like you said, they have never played in the District 4 championship game before, coming off a good season. They come into Towanda and just were a little more prepared because they've been through those wars.
Yeah, shout out to Coach Wecker. Did a nice job his first year back. He took over for Dawsey last time too, right? And now he's taking over again. He did a great job keeping them together early when Riley was out with missed the first couple of games, but Riley Vanderpool, man, what a career he had. I mean, 4 straight 1,000-yard seasons, I believe.
As far as I know.
For him. And the best player I saw this year, I think, individual player. It's tough, like we said, it's tough to say when Troy's when Woodward and those guys aren't getting the touches that Riley can get every game. But just in 6 touchdowns, the kind of in that first playoff game, that was incredible.
I think we'll see, as Troy advances, those starters are going to play more and more.
Yeah.
So we'll see a little bit more of what they're capable of.
Oh, if I'm voting for NGL Player of the Year and Troy Woodward leads them to a state title, I think.
Yeah, it would be tough to vote against him. That's
Absolutely.
I had the pleasure this year to actually see the only game so far where, as far as I can tell or remember, but that Troy played its guys all the way through, start to finish. I went down to that Dover game, the game in Wilmington against Dover, and that was as hard fought can be. It was 8-3 final, week 2, I believe. So,
yeah.
But they can go all the way, and that's what you start to wonder is, like, is attrition going to maybe set in with them if they have to go deep into a third?
Well, they were still in shape then. Now, I mean, these guys, I'm serious. I mean, they have not played more than 2.5 quarters of football since that Dover game.
If I know Jimmy Smith at all, I'm sure they're
in shape. Yeah,
I don't think that's a question.
But it's different, though.
It is. Game shape is different.
But when a team's unbeaten and hasn't played many close games, you need something to talk about, right?
Yeah.
So, something to keep an eye on.
And I don't see, like I said, Warrior Run had a good season, but I don't think they can match up with Troy this week.
I also just imagine, and if we wanted to move on, but just the confidence you get from a win like that. I mean, this Troy group was already really confident that 2 straight seasons unbeaten in the NTL, and then you go and you get the only team that beat you a year prior, and not only do you beat them, you stamp it home down the stretch. So I'd imagine it's going to be a really big week, and if they come out of the gates like they did against Southern Columbia, against Warrior Run, they could put up 20 points before Warrior Runs really had a chance to catch up. I mean, and
their special teams have been huge too.
Yeah,
a couple of returns.
And that was the thing, is they opened the game with a kick return for a touchdown. So it was like, okay, we're not going to not score any points. We're going to score a bunch. So, and it was going back through it. I mentioned to you guys, I was able to I enjoy that they live stream their games. A lot of the schools up here do, and I think that's a cool feature of it all. And just right up the middle, he had 3 blockers running straight up the middle with him. So just a ready to play in that moment kind of thing that night.
I know the big talk around here, both in NTL, I think, and the New York side, is that wishing Troy Waverly could have matched up this year in the regular season, and that would have, I think their strengths are the strengths.
Last year or this year would have been fun.
It's kind of back in the day, 2-3 years ago, when it was Canton, Tioga, everybody's wondering who would win that game, and unfortunately, couldn't happen this year. I think they might have talked about it a little bit.
They played JV.
Yeah,
they played a JV game, but yeah, they definitely talked about it. The coaches, there's a tie there. Dave Shaw from Waverly works with one of the assistant coaches from Troy.
Oh, okay.
So there's a definite tie there. That's how they got to play the JV game and stuff. So
once they both make a run, win the title, maybe we'll set up a Christmas Day match.
I was going to say Saturday morning game.
I think there'd be a few people there too.
There's 2 teams in Portland, Maine, where I used to work, always had a Thanksgiving Day game. It'd be after the season because their season's over a little earlier than here, and they always play a week later. Basketball coaches and wrestling coaches hated it.
Yeah, right.
That's where it comes into it. Like, are we passing out waivers to all the players? Yeah. Like, if you want to play in this game.
But, good luck to the Trojans. Obviously, they play Friday night over at Mansfield University again, taking on Warrior Run. Man, I wish that game could be in Tawanda. Is such a great stadium, and I know there was some issues there, so unfortunately it's going to be at Mansfield. But how was the stadium? I was over there for a youth football game 2-3 years ago. They have sprint football there now, but
last time I was over there was when Bragalone was playing at South Williamsport, and they played in this district finals against Southern Columbia
there.
And big crowd. It was pretty loud. I thought it was pretty fun.
Yeah,
and I was just there as a fan. So it was, that was a lot of fun.
It was a good field. There was a driving wind, which I guess is just a product of its location.
On the hill there, yeah.
So that actually took away maybe a couple of the passing shots the 2 teams were looking at early going one way, but it rained for like 25 minutes during I want to say it was the 3rd quarter, and as a writer that's walking the sideline,
it's always fun.
That left me with some headaches, but we managed.
Let's talk a little bit about Muncie. You saw them once this year, right?
Seen them twice in the regular season, and then I went down for their opener against Canton in the district.
So they roll over Lime Mountain 42-6 to win that district class A title. I thought we were talking before. I thought it was going to be like a 20-point win maybe, because Lime Mountain had 3 losses, but all the big teams, good teams. Steel High Spire was won by 3, 43-40. But then, Muncie, Austin Johnson, talking about the best player. He's got a case. He's in the NTL, right? Muncie. I keep forgetting that. Muncie. So maybe the Oklahoma State wrestling commit is the real deal.
Yeah, him and Landon Wolmer. I hope I'm getting that pronunciation just half right. But they create a dynamic 1-2 punch down there, and they just punishing runners. That's what comes to mind.
He's the one that beat up on Athens.
So you have some guys that are maybe more elusive, but these guys are they're going to come downhill and they're going to make you miss while they're hitting you. So you stack that with a quarterback, I believe, in Styles Iyer, who has looked good at points this year throwing the ball.
Another Iyer kid.
Another Iyer kid. Yeah. Has had some good stretches of quarterback play back there. You throw that with a good running game, and the offense has been good to go for big stretches of the year.
AAA, I'm excited to see how this one goes. Danville, number 1 against number 2 Lewisburg. Both teams really good.
I haven't seen Danville this year, but I saw them the last 2 years, and they don't seem to have taken any kind of step back, even though they lost some really good players last year. So that'll be an interesting football game.
And Shamokin beat Athens first week, 50-7. Then they get the win, 28-27, a wild one over Jersey Shore.
You guys
some controversy there with
how that one
was an extra point.
The extra game tying extra point. Shamokin won it 28-27.
Yeah.
I don't want to misspeak. They got over, and before it could have been blocked, they didn't even kick it. They tried to go for the 2-point conversion, scramble, and it hit the ground. And
he almost jumped over before the.
That's what, if you're on the Shamokin sideline, you're saying he lined that up perfectly. If you're on the Jersey Shore sideline, you're saying he jumped.
Well, even our friend at the Williamsport paper on his Instagram post was saying it was blatantly obvious that Jersey Shore got,
Doc Master.
Jersey Shore got hosed and stuff. Yeah, when they showed the video of it, and it was
close. I mean, I saw the video of Mark Malkowski there from the Shamokin paper, right? The news item, maybe posted that. Yeah, it was crazy. 28-27. District 4 is loaded this year. I mean, Shamokin's got a chance, I think, to make a little bit of a run. You never know in Quad A. That's bigger schools. I think Danville and then Muncie in Single A and Troy obviously could be one of the favorites in Double A there. So
Muncie's got their hands full this week, I think, with that Lackawanna Trail.
Lackawanna Trail is 11-1, so that's going to be a good matchup there. Good luck to all the District 4 teams. Before we move on to other sports in the NTL, talk about Canton. Obviously, have you talked to Coach Sechrist that were disappointed? I think he knew this year might have been a little down after
they lost so much. They lost so much the last couple of years.
The big thing that in different weeks in conversations was they had a numbers problem on top of an injuries problem, and you put those two problems together, you're going to have on the field struggles and difficulties. But one thing that, again, this comes back to the old shoe banquet for me, but I remember at media day at the beginning of the year, the word, every year they pick a word, and their word was persistence or persistent. I forget which variation it was.
Yeah.
And when you look back at the Canton season, they did that. They stuck around. They might have not. Holden Ward missed a couple of games with injury. They had some injuries on the offensive and defensive lines. But they hung around. I think that Athens game, the Athens-Canton game on a Saturday at like 1 o'clock, that was one of my favorite games I've covered all year. It was just Coach Sean Bradley said afterwards, it was like a Big 12 game. And I remember I said that at one point during the third quarter, and it just was. So, I mean, it's kind of a regrouping year. It sounds like I just missed out on the state runs that they went on. So anytime you have highs that high, water's going to find its level, right? So, but I think there's still a lot of good things.
It was a matter of a very small school reaching very big heights. And at some point or another, it cycles back to be, and they just lost so many talented kids and didn't have the same numbers. So you knew if they had any kind of injury problems this year, they didn't have the same depth they'd had the last few years. Yeah, and I think that's
gone through
really
like in baseball more than football, really. But they've gone through this runs of really good kids, and Coach Sechrist does a great job, and looking forward to seeing what he does over the years. And I think for next year, first year in a long time without any wards,
as far as on the roster, the last ward coming through football.
We had Coach Sechrist on here early on, and he said, "Well, if I coach long enough, maybe I'll have another one down the road." But I know they got a really good youth program coming up through. I think Coach Sechrist has a kid on one of the teams there, and I think they'll be fine in a couple of years. I think they're always going to compete in the NTL small school, but
they went through this. They were, back when Miller Moyer was coaching, they were a powerhouse. Boo Perry was quarterbacking them. They went to the state semifinals, I believe, and so then they had a few lean years. And then they were good for a while, and then they became very, very good here in the last 10 years.
So I think it ended up being a 6 or 7, maybe 8-man senior class for them. At the skill positions, they're also going to have to replace Ben Fitch, who played a lot of quarterback, did some tight end work for him when Holden went under center, and then also Aiden Holcomb, who was the X-factor difference maker at wide receiver. So that group went out and they made it to 500 by the end of the year and made it to the playoffs. So maybe it's a lot more of where do we go from here and who's going to take on some of those roles going forward.
Why losing Rich Rogers done a nice job there to kind of turn them around. 4-6 year, but had some nice wins this year, and they competed more than they have in a few years.
A really good start out of the gates for them. I think, I hope I don't have that wrong. They started 3-0.
3-0, yeah.
If it wasn't 3-0, it was 3-1. And then they, as far as I know it, went back to the Wyalusing brand of football, which was hard running game and defense. And that was kind of what when he came in, he wanted to do. And let me tell you, they did it. They had a couple of runners back there that just would 4 yards a carry, 3 yards a carry. And then maybe they run a reverse. It was against Canton. Wyalusing, I think it might have been a Thursday night game. It could have been Friday, but
I think it was Thursday, yeah.
They ran a they ran a reverse, and then it was a pass to their fullback. Ethan Vanderpool was running down the field. No one went with him, and he caught a 53-yard touchdown.
They probably, you can count on one hand how many passes they threw all year, right?
And I think it all worked in their favor for that play, so that was
part of the problem.
But they had a run game, and then they had a hard-nosed defense that kept them in a lot of games while they were trying to get their run game going. So
yeah, so
you have to be perfect though. When you don't have a passing game threat, you have to be perfect. You can't put the ball on the ground. You can't get penalties or you get behind the chains, and that's a lot to ask high school kids.
And that game, you say that was their game against South Williamsport this year. I believe they lost by 2 points, and they had a shot at a potential winning field goal from a long distance. But on that final drive, they had two stretches where there was back-to-back penalties or maybe a hold during the play. And Coach Rogers talked after that. He said, if we get into 1st and 20, the drive's over right there. That's what he said that night. So that if you're going to commit to that brand of football, you have to be perfect in all the...
You have to be disciplined, and that's a lot to ask 15, 16, 17, 18.
It was 21-19 that game to South.
Yeah.
Let's move on to other sports in the NTL, all wrapped up in the Northern Tier League, right? What were your top stories non-football wise?
There's been a couple of them. Volleyball has been an interesting year for me to follow. When I was in college, I called a couple of volleyball games on the radio, but it's never been a sport where I could tell you everything that was going on out on the floor. I've learned a lot about the game this year, and to follow a team like Northeast Bradford, who won their district last year and then won it again this year. The story for them was the target's on our back now, right? To use a cliche, and they won the district again and made it to the state playoffs. They played an absolute thriller against Mountain View last week. It literally came down to the final 3 points of the night. But on top of them, Troy Volleyball made it all the way to the district final. They had a thrilling match with Wellsboro in that game. They just kind of took care of their business to win the league, the large school that was. So those are probably the two major volleyball programs that jumped out. But, I mean, a lot of great moments.
I'll chime in. Athens had 5 wins going into the district finals and lose 5. They were up in the 5th set and lose 16-14 in the 5th set. A match they should have won. I mean, I was down there. They should have won that match. But, I'll give credit to Heather Darrow. She did a nice job with that team, especially in the postseason. They lost some matches this year they shouldn't have lost. But they played well in the real well in the semis and should have won the match is all I'll say in the finals. But
I'm a little pissed because I worked at the newspaper for a long time, and every year we have to travel somewhere to cover district. So you getting to go to Athens to cover district volleyball?
Yeah,
who knows the Corey Bozier for
going to Williamson.
It worked out nice that way. The start of that week, I did have to drive down to Loyal Sock on Monday for Troy girls soccer. I'm still getting my miles in.
Well, volleyball's the only one, so that way you get anything up here anymore. You used to have track a little bit at Athens, but.
And shout out to Corey for not taking home court advantage for.
Yeah, he sent Athens down to Williamsport. Yeah,
Because Williamson took the home court every year.
Yeah, it's basically whoever runs District 4 volleyball gets a pick where they send everybody. But
it worked out nice that game against that Troy Wellsboro game, that district final in 2A. I hope I get that right off the top of my head, but. It was such an entertaining match, and being able to shoot photos and cover the game and see the different spots and where things are working. It was as a sports fan above it all, it was one of those big moments of the year.
Aside from football, to be honest with you, when it's played well, I love volleyball. It's probably my favorite sport in the fall, other than football, because when it's played well, it's exciting. Let's move on to soccer. Go with the girls on the first. Troy had a really good regular season, kind of ran into a tough matchup in the postseason.
They did. They won their first game. They played Williamson, a team that they had seen that year. I was at Towanda High School. Worked out good for me. Light travel that night, but just another ho-hum year for them in the league. They did what they set out to do. They won the league title. And it was funny the way it worked out, and I'm sure it affected your week that week too, because they had a home and away with Athens, and that was where the district standing, or the league standings were kind of on the line that week. So,
well, unfortunately, Williamson had beaten Athens the Thursday before that. So basically, Athens had to sweep to have a chance, and Troy won the first night, so it was over with. But
it was a great season for them. I like talking to their coach, Wayne Pratt. He also does some softball for Troy, so he's always a good quote, and just talks about the team and what they work on and how they correct in house. And it was a good season, and they played a lot of really good soccer. I think just besides until the postseason loss, just the one loss on the year. And that was on a day where they had a doubleheader, and one of their captains, Alexis McRoberts, left to go kick for Canton before coming back. So she played 3 games that day. But just a really good season, and a season on. They lost some seniors last year who's going to kind of step up and take over. They had some changes along the back line on defense, had some new players kind of take on scoring roles for them, and they just kept the train rolling. So aside from them, Wyalusing girls soccer, they had a good run. They made it into the district playoffs this year too. Their biggest thing was, where are we going to find all our goal production after your all-time leading scorer, Olivia Haley, graduates? They had a couple games where that was a question they had to answer against Wellsboro, because it felt like all the best games in Bradford County came against Wellsboro when it came to town this year. They tied them in the first matchup of the season, and then in Wyalusing, they almost tied them again. Chloe Bennett gets a goal, double overtime with like 3 minutes to play, and that was the decider in that one. So they had an exciting year. I went down it was a Monday. They played a Sullivan County team and had to come back from, I think they were down 2-0, so they ended up winning 3-2. So another good team, another team that was in the postseason the year prior and fought to get back there and stay there this year.
Towanda boys, first kind of successful year on the soccer pitch in a long time, right?
They had a really exciting year too. They came down to the last 2 games of the season. I think they needed 2 wins to get in. I was lucky enough to be at their senior day. They came back to win that one, another 3-2 victory. I want to say they played Montrose that day. I think that's right. But just their seniors got to leave their home field with a win, and then they had to go, I believe it was Shamokin. They went down to play and ended up losing that game to just miss the postseason, but something to fight for that deep into the year. Sounds like it wasn't the norm at Towanda over the last couple.
Talking about successful cross country, always good in the NTL, maybe one of the our better sports, I would think, over the last 3, 4, or 5 years. Anyway.
Yeah, NTL always fares well postseason, and this year Creed doing as usual. Last, I think, 13 years, I think he's placed in a row. It stands
4-time state medalist. And we were talking before, Chris Manning, big into the cross country, so he was down there. He covered that, but just a bunch of good performances. And what I appreciate about cross country is that it seems like more talented runners are always on the way. So like Towanda, for example, a runner like Izzy Larson, I think she finished 30th in her race this year at state. So I believe just a sophomore could be back and maybe pushing for that podium for the next 2 years. We've seen a couple of seniors ready to move on, run their last cross-country race, whether it's Sarah Bronson at Athens, but then you think about a guy like Graham Wank, who's going to hopefully keep progressing his way on the boys' side of things. So a lot of talented running, and then when they get together in those big meets down, whether it's districts or even states, on the track side of things, whether it's the NTL invites, it's cool to see where everybody stacks up against one another. And NEB boys, they went back and raced as a team, the only team to make it from the NTL this year. Down at States, but really just an exciting thing. Not something I knew a lot about before I got into it. I was a swimmer in high school.
We're big runners,
Yeah, right.
I figured so. I mean, you guys went for 2 miles before coming in here tonight, right? But just it's an interesting and how much you have to put into it to get out, and that's true of all sports. But that's just you against the course most nights.
Yeah.
So.
Definitely. So, looking ahead a little bit, what are you looking forward to this winter in the NTL?
Am I allowed to say wrestling? I mean, I think that's the answer I'm supposed to say. Right? Yeah, I really am. Wrestling's another one of those. Just to peel back the curtain, in my case, when I was in college, I did 3 beats my senior year. It was football, it was basketball, and then it was lacrosse, which I'm banging on the table to try to get some more up this way. But so I'm learning a lot about these new sports as I'm getting to cover them, and wrestling was one of the biggest ones. I swam and I played basketball. I was never a wrestler. I'm really excited to see this year play out. I got to follow it all the way last year and down into Hershey and I'm excited to see what Tawana is going to put out. They're going to have a couple of seniors that were captains last year that are all going to be back. Some of them have already crossed the 100-win threshold for their careers. Maybe a couple more are going to be looking to get there.
They should have a shot to win the District 4 duels title, I would think.
Well, I was going to say, you are blessed to be able to cover high school wrestling in Pennsylvania and to go to the state championships and be able to, now that they've got everything together, the AA and AAA.
And the girls.
And the girls. But, I mean, as far as the boys, and for the girls, too, here in the near future, when you start watching wrestling on ESPN Plus or on Flow Wrestling, you're going to see a lot of those kids you covered. I couldn't tell you when the last 5 years how many kids I've seen on television that I covered, whether it was for one match or two matches at States. At least I saw them at States wrestling. It's amazing.
And big news, Tawana girls first. They're going to have a girls program for the first time. So I'm sure that's something. Your new AD down there in Tawana, Jack Young, is loving the head official for PIAA wrestling.
I imagine that was probably, if it wasn't one on his checklist, it might have been two.
That's going to be fun to watch because credit to Jay White and those guys at Athens. They kind of started the whole girls thing and not District 4 really.
Well, Northeast Bradford, those girls wrestled
at Athens.
Jay White at Athens.
Sarah, Troy.
Yep, and now Troy.
And Tawanda. So, I mean, the whole league basically wrestled at Athens for the first 4 years.
Yep.
But it's nice to see there are going to be some dual meets this year, I think, between some of these, hopefully.
So
I'm also excited for basketball.
I was going to say, Troy boys got to be the team to reckon with, I think.
Now, hopefully they don't get to practice for like 4 more weeks.
But you would think so. They graduated a couple of guys that were some key contributors. The one name that comes to mind right off the top of my head is a guard like Colin Loveland. He did a lot of shooting, a lot of defense for him, but they bring a lot of that group last year back, and they had I was at their state playoff game that came down to overtime last March. I went right there after I left the Giant Center in Hershey on that. It was a rainy Saturday, but I went over to that game, and they play hard-nosed defense. They go get their layups. They shoot their threes when they're there, and a lot of those athletes that you see on the football field will go right over to the heart.
And Woodward's not known to go real deep into his bench, so he'll bring in a couple kids they'll plug in, and he'll have a 6 or 7 man rotation, and they're going to be fine.
Bring back Evan Woodward, JB Burbage, right, and some of these other. I mean, they're going to be. And they're the just like in football. I think they're the prohibitive favorites in the Northern Tier League.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
There's a guy like point guard Jackson Taylor too, who wasn't maybe a scorer, but he did a lot of assisting. Lance Heasley also graduated. He came off a lot of times off the bench for them. And then there's one more that I'm blanking on off the top of my head, but it's how do we continue that progression, right? They had such a good season last year, go on to the state playoffs. So really fun NTL showcase game against North Penn Mansfield, and then also their district game that they dropped to Loyalsock was a thriller too. So I think they'll probably be the favorite
program. Loyalsock, I mean, they've been a basketball power for years.
It's going to be fun to watch. Logan, tell everybody where they can find stuff on both the Daily Review and the Morning Times.
In our papers every day. We do a podcast every week. We put them on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, pretty much wherever you get them. If you can't find it somewhere, reach out to me. I'll figure out a way to get it there for you. But we're in the paper every day and online at thedailyreview.com, morningtimes.com. And I do all my stuff on my own Twitter account. That's Loga Hilltopper, LOGAHILLTOPPER. I spell it because people will throw the N on there. That's a long story I don't have time for tonight. But we're out there. We're trying to have the best of both worlds, run the newspaper every day, and also bring you some coverage and how things are changing. We don't have a TikTok page yet. That could be coming down the pipe soon enough. But
well, we're happy to have you on here. We want to thank our sponsor, Jim Lister, at J Lister LLC and Lenders Assistance. Give Jim Lister a call, 607-857-2036. Email him at jim.lister@yahoo.com. Let his 30 years in the automobile industry work for you. Well, thank you to Logan Hill from the Morning Times and Daily Review. For Tim Burney, I'm Pat McDonald. Our next episode will be joined by Cam Hills from the Waverly Wolverines and might have some guests with them too. So we're excited about that. But we'll talk to you next time on Two Guys Talking Sports.